At the core of all subtractive synthesis is the notion of filtering. Now, basically, filtering a sound involves setting a cutoff value with this cutoff knob, above or below which frequencies will be cut off, and then adjusting the resonance control over here, which emphasizes the frequencies right around the cutoff point. Now, those are the two main controls, and we've seen that in Trillion on the main page. A lot of the patches have filter controls directly here. And I've initialized this patch and loaded in just a single layer sound source here, so nothing is set yet. And this is what it sounds like as is. We have a lot more control working in the edit page here because each layer has a separate filter that can be set uniquely for each sound source. And in addition to that, there's a dual filter architecture here in Trillion, which we'll look at in another video, where we can actually run two filters on each layer, either in series or in parallel. Now let's start by turning on the power. So this is what it sounds like without any filtering applied. And I'll turn it on. So we hear a big difference right away. Now there are different types of filters. The most common kind of filtering is a low-pass filter, and that's what this is. LPF stands for low-pass filter. And that means that the frequencies above the cutoff point are removed. So right now the knob is fairly low, so that means it's removing a lot of the higher end. And as I raise the cutoff, more of the high end will come through. Now that's a low-pass filter. We have some presets available here in Trillion, and we have low-pass filters, and there's various different types of settings. Now it's important to know that when we call up these presets, they don't recall the actual values for any of these knobs. They just call up different filter types. So there are different filter types, different types of low-pass, and these are some of the ones that say rich and Moogie are the ones, or super, are the ones that have the dual filter in play or parallel wide. But the basic incarnations here just have single layer low-pass filters. And then we have high-pass filters, which do the opposite. They filter out the frequencies below the cutoff knob. So let's switch to one of those. Let's go to regular high-pass one. Let's try that one. So you see, the lower the cutoff knob is, the more it allows the fuller frequency range to pass through, and as we raise it, it filters out the lower end. Now another type of filter is a bandpass filter, and what that does is it allows a narrow band to pass through and filters out the opposite ends of where the cutoff is set at. There's other types that we're going to look at in the dual filter section. There's notch filter, which does the opposite, which basically notches out the frequencies right where the cutoff is and leaves everything around it intact. And then there's some specialty filters for some nice comb filtering type of effects, but we'll look at those separately. Let's go back to a low-pass filter. And the dB indicates how steep a filter is, how dramatically it's going to cut off the frequencies, the slope. Now let's dial up some resonance, and we can hear the frequencies right around the cutoff point get enhanced or accentuated or excited. So you can hear how the resonance really accentuates or excites the frequencies right around where the cutoff is. Now where filtering gets really interesting is when you modulate the parameters, and Trillion has 3 dedicated built-in modulation pathways to modulate the cutoff value. The first one is key tracking. Now basically, this is a dedicated filter modulation control that modulates the filter or the cutoff based on the pitch of the note being triggered. At the minimum setting, like it's at now, the filter is applied equally to all pitches. And the higher the key value is set, the more the filter will open up in the upper range and close in the lower range. So when I put it in high values all the way up, we'll hardly hear anything passing through down low. And up high, it's wide open. And down low, it'll be fully closed now. And we can click this and invert it, which makes it interesting. So now we'll have the opposite happen. Right now, we're hearing hardly anything opened up down low, and it's wide open up high. I'll invert it by clicking that. When it's white, you can see it's inverted, and now it'll be fully open down low. And closes up higher up. So, very interesting way of modulating the cutoff. And if we leave it at the center, I'll command click, it's kind of a natural opening and closing that tracks the range of the keyboard. So naturally, some of the lower notes are filtered, but not completely. Now we also have an envelope depth control, and this is another dedicated filter modulation control, and it sets the amount that the filter envelope settings affect the cutoff frequencies. Now we looked briefly at envelopes. We looked at the amp envelope, how we can affect the attack and release of a sound, but there's a filter envelope. By clicking there, and again, this is unique for each layer, the filter on each layer. So right now we're on layer A, and this is the filter envelope setting for layer A. And this basically controls the depth, how much these settings will affect the filter. And I'm going to leave it fully up now so we can hear it. So right now, this is as it is. Let me put the keyboard tracking all the way off so we hear it fully open for now. Now I can adjust the attack of the filter. I'll bring it up slowly. You hear the filter kicking in slowly over time. And it's dropping off very suddenly. And we can adjust that with the decay time. Let me lower this a bit. Now if I raise the decay time, it'll decay more naturally. You hear it decaying more naturally. And the level that it arrives at once it decays is the sustain level. Let me put this all the way off, and you can hear it by abruptly cutting directly from the attack to the sustain level. The sustain level determines at what frequency the filter will rest at. So once the attack is reached and the decay brings the frequencies down, this determines where it'll rest at. And the higher I raise this, the higher the frequency it'll rest at. So here it is with it all the way down again. And I'll raise it. So you hear the frequency, or the cutoff value rather, being set differently at the resting point. Now we have a hold knob, and that gets in between the attack and the decay. So basically what this does is it'll hold the filter for a specific number of seconds or milliseconds. It'll hold the filter at the value it's at once the attack is reached before the decay begins. So let's leave this off for the moment and dial up some decay. So now we hear it reaches the attack and then it decays. Now I'm going to dial in some hold, let's say for about a second or so, and it'll hold the value once it's reached its full attack before the decay begins. So it just makes it wait longer, a user-defined number of seconds or milliseconds. Now another dedicated way of modulating the cutoff is with velocity. Right now this is full up, meaning that the lower I hit a note, the less it'll be filtered, and the higher the velocity that I hit the note, the more it'll be filtered. Very low. Louder. Now if I dial that down, we're not going to get any velocity tracking, and basically the filter will be triggered the same regardless of the velocity that I hit the note. And with it up, we get a more sensitive performance vehicle here to play musically with the filter. And another word about the envelope, this can be inverted as well, and it'll invert all the controls. And right now we're hardly hearing anything because this interacts with the cutoff value. Basically, when this is in the regular mode, this works more the lower the cutoff is at. Because the higher it is, the more the frequencies are passing through and the less work the filter is doing. But when it's inverted, it's the opposite. Here we need it to be higher in order for the effects of the filter to be heard. Versus having lower values when it's not inverted. And here, of course, it's working in reverse. So we can get some really nice, interesting effects like that. And so finally, the actual envelope knob itself is kind of like a send control of how much this envelope is going to affect the filter sound. So I can mix it in, the straight filter, without these parameters applied. Or more of it. So So that's a little introduction to the filter section. And finally, we have, of course, a gain slider here. And this is just an output gain control for this stage of the signal flow. We have basically our sound shaping parameters here in the filtering section, and that outputs into the amp section, meaning these sliders here, or the effects patches that are in the effects rack. That's the amp section of the actual amplitude of the sound. So gain control for the output stage of the filter section. Next video, we're going to look at the dual filter setup.